Let me just tell y'all, if you have only experienced Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles through the TV shows, you bitches aren't ready for what I'm about to talk about in these comics, no matter how dark and gritty the reboot, even though the only dark and gritty reboot of the show was the 2003 series, but whatever. I'll be talking today about the Image comics, which were published way back when, and are some of the craziest and darkest stuff ever inserted into the canon. If I am left with a rose in my hand, let it die. These comics ran from 1986 to 1999 and was some of the darkest and craziest stuff to ever enter the TMNT canon. Although to say that is a bit of a misnomer, as Peter Laird, co-creator of the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comics back in '84, no longer considers these canon. No word, at least from Kevin Eastman, but I assume that he also does not consider it canon. And the reasons why they don't consider them canon is, wow, I really should have researched that more, but I didn't, and I'm not even here to talk about the technical stuff. I'm here to talk about the sheer craziness of the storylines, which include many severe mutilations to the characters, and that's right, you heard that right. I said severe mutilations, as most of the characters, except for Michelangelo, go through some very severe trauma, and I'm sure Michelangelo had some severe mental trauma left over after all this shit that went down. But, kind of like in Rise, he escaped relatively unscathed, at least physically. So, yeah, we're gonna break that down today. So, a quick little backstory here. I first found out about these comics all the way back in 2007 when I was an active user on the TMNT forum, which was, back in those days, the go-to website for anybody who was a giant TMNT fan. And wow, I can't talk. The site is actually still around today, and it is known as the Technodrome forums. And I honestly had no idea that they were still around until I randomly received an email from them about an account that apparently was still up, and it blew me all the way back to those days when I was still active on that forum. And as far as I can tell, they are completely different from what they used to be, and they are okay on activity, but I am not here to talk about the TMNT forum. Maybe we'll go into that one day, and if you guys would be so kind, I would really appreciate if you left a like on this video, and maybe even subscribed, because I have more turtle content on the way. But for now, let's get back to the craziness that was the Image TMNT comics. Now, these comics, as I said, were very dark and very mature and not at all intended for children. And originally, the series itself was not intended for children and didn't become more kid-friendly until the 1987 show, which there are some fans who are much more into the comics and much more into these classics, I guess you could say, and they take issue with the kidification of the show. However, I believe that this is a blessing in disguise, as if the show had not become more kid-friendly, it would probably not still be around today, at least not in the capacity that it is. And, that would be sad. That would suck. Now, I'm sure you're all wondering, didn't you mention something about severe mutilations? Yes, I did, and yes, almost all of the characters went through some kind of severe, terrible trauma that resulted in the disfigurement of their bodies, or in Donatello's case, a lot more than that. However, let's go over what happened with Raphael first, because when I first found out about these comics, the fate, I suppose, or the terrible accident. Actually, it wasn't an accident, so I don't know why I just said accident, but the terrible circumstances which followed Raphael through these comics really stuck with me, because, wow, there was a certain panel in the comic that I will never forget, and I might put it up here if I feel like scarring you all for life, or you can go look it up after I tell you more about it. So first off, we have Raphael, who gets his face in the worst way disfigured. He basically becomes the Phantom of the Opera after receiving an attack from the Foot Clan and loses an eye. That was retconned, though, from the original part, where basically his entire half of Well, okay, wait, let me gather myself because I'm thinking about it and it's like still kind of like fucking with my head. Basically, he gets half of his face melted off, and it really, really, really looks like exactly what you'd think it would look like. I mean, there's an eyeball, like, basically just hanging off of his face, and it's just, like, melted. It looks like somebody held him up to a grill and just, like, shoved his face on part of it. So, obviously, he was not very mentally stable after that, and he began to wear one of Casey Jones's masks, kind of in the vein of Phantom of the Opera, which, at the time was extremely popular, and what am I even saying? Phantom of the Opera remains extremely popular. So yes, Raphael became the Phantom of the Opera for a period of time. Eventually, this was retconned into just losing an eye, which is kind of a lot to retcon because, like I said, like half of his face was gone, and wow, it was graphic. Um, he eventually went on to do some other stuff that I will get into later, but for now, let's keep going along the severe mutilation train with Leonardo, who lost his hand after it was eaten by this guy who turned into a Komodo dragon that I won't go into, but yeah, he turned into a Komodo dragon and straight up ate Leonardo's hand off his arm. But it worked out though because after that, Donatello gave him this like steel like cap thingy, and it had a blade in it. So even though he had lost one of his sword hands, he then gained a sword hand. Y'all didn't think that was funny? I even put a pause in there for laughter. No? Okay. Alright. Speaking of Donatello, though, wow, did he get the blunt end of the fuck up stick because he uh, didn't just get his face disfigured like Raphael or lose a hand, he basically lost his entire body. And when I mean that, yes, he lost basically his entire body and became part cyborg. Um, or, well, a cyborg, I guess, because you can't really be part cyborg, because aren't cyborgs usually, like, human machine anyway, or turtle machine in this case. Anyway, he became part cyborg, and not only did he lose his body, he basically also lost his mind, or at least sometimes he lost his mind, because in the comics, it was established that the computer motherboard inside of his brain that was part of the cyborg part of him would sometimes fight for dominance of the body. So basically, he not only had to go through all that, which included getting shot at until he was basically Swiss cheese and then thrown out of a moving helicopter, he then basically got schizophrenia or DID. I'm not sure which one it would be technically. I'm not a mental health doctor, so don't skewer me in the comments for not knowing what this would be because it doesn't actually matter anyway, because these are comic book characters and I'm not talking about real people here. So, yeah, that happened. And it was pretty fucking awesome, actually. Like, for as much as I'm going on about how these were mentally scarring, because honestly they kind of were, and that image of Raphael's face melting off is pretty much the most terrifying thing I've ever seen in my entire life. But these changes and this storyline was pretty cool. It was really cool back then for me to see a more mature take on the series, and it remains cool now to see. Or at least to discuss. It's been a long time since I've actually read any of these comics, and like I said, a lot of fans don't seem to know about them because they are no longer considered canon to the, you know, universe as a whole, at least not by Peter Laird. But there's even more to go into, and I promise it doesn't involve more bodily harm. Well, it won't after we cover what happened to Splinter anyway. So Splinter, our dear old rat daddy, um, was transformed into Bat Daddy. Yeah, he got mutated again and became a weird bat monster and went completely feral and basically ran away and disappeared for like the majority of the series. Um, yeah, it kind of sucked because it just left the turtles with no sensei, and at one point Leonardo ran off to find him, and it was just a whole hullabaloo that really just sucked all around. So that happened. But let's also talk about Michelangelo, who yeah, he actually didn't go through any severe bodily trauma. He kept his face and all extremities. I can't really speak on if he kept his mind, though. He probably went a little crazy seeing all that shit go down. Um, and, maybe a bit of survivor's guilt for not losing some kind of part of, his body. Um, but yeah, that happened. He actually was a writer in this series. He wrote some poems. He was really big into that. He wrote um, a book that was called "A Rose Among the Thorns," and it was a romance. So yeah, he was a soft boy. He was very, and I can totally see Mikey as a writer, especially of poems. Uh, and actually, it's even mentioned in one of the comics by April that Oprah loved Mikey's book. So I guess that's cool. I think he had like a pen name. I don't know, actually. I don't think he did. Maybe. Somebody called him Hemingway, though. It was probably Raph. But, yeah. So, yeah. That is that. At least as far as the whole thing with the Image comics go. I think also. Yes, it was. Yes, I'm remembering right. The Image Comics was the first time that Raphael became the Shredder. Well, I say first time as if it's happened again, but really it was only referenced in the 2003 series as kind of a one-off little like character moment. But yes, in the Image Comics, Raphael deadass just becomes the Shredder because if I remember correctly, he's trying to like do something with the mob, or like he's trying to like stop the mob from doing like, yeah, I almost said doing a gang war. That's totally how you go about that. Basically, like there's a gang war that's about to start or something, and like he gets involved on accident. And he's still, I think in this phase, he's still doing his whole like Phantom of the Opera thing. They might have retconned it already at this point to the eyeball thing, because I don't think that whole I don't think that whole Phantom of the Opera phrase lasted very long. But I'd love to see that explored a bit. It would kind of suck though, because I don't really want to see that happen to Raph again, because he's my baby, and it kind of made me sad when his face got fucked up. But yeah, he gets involved on accident between a gang war. What? I don't. What am I talking about? That didn't even make sense. Anyway, he gets involved in a gang war on accidente with the mob and the Foot Clan, and he ends up donning the Shredder's armor because he's like, "Fuck that! We're not gonna do this today." So he like mentally dominates the Foot and also the mob. Like he like scares them basically out of a gang war. And if anybody was gonna do it, it would be Raph. But yeah. So then he like just becomes the Shredder, and he gets all up in that role. I don't even remember where. Oh wait, never mind. Yeah. Um, yeah, he got the armor through reasons. Um, so that's cool. That's pretty cool. We always knew he was the edgiest of all the turtles. Um, and I actually really do enjoy the plot line of him becoming the Shredder. I think it's a cool, gritty, and dark explanation for some of his um, more violent tendencies, or not explanation. It's a cool exploration of his more violent and dark tendencies and what might happen if he gave in to them. Um, wow, I really need to reread the Image comics because I can't think of anything specific besides what I mentioned just now to talk about. There was a spin off series called Body Count that was basically Casey and Raph save a hoe. And, yeah, that sounds harsh, but, that was basically the entirety of the mini series that came out. Um, I do think it's pretty interesting that this run of the comics is no longer considered canon, and I don't ever really hear anybody talking about any of it. And I'm kind of surprised that Mikey is never introduced as a writer in other versions either. But, that might also be because most other versions kind of just make him, borderlines, you know, the word I was going to say there, but I'm not going to say it. Because that's mean, and nobody likes people who are mean. Except for me. I like mean people. Well, I like mean turtles. I love me some Raphael. I'm getting off track. But yes, that is the Image comics. I will be going into a couple other things as it pertains to these storylines and how they could be used, interestingly, in other versions, or even maybe how they could be reintroduced, or at least some of these concepts could be reintroduced to be used in the current run of the Ninja Turtles by IDW. Yeah, let's get into that. Oh my god, wait, I'm remembering something now. There was this girl named Shadow Jones, and she was basically Casey's adopted daughter with April, except she was actually the daughter or granddaughter or something of Adon from the mob. And there's a part where Mikey has to rescue her, and he dresses up like a priest, um, where she's gonna be baptized, and which let me tell you, as somebody who was baptized Catholic, um, and all that good stuff, as you can probably tell by my name and all that. Um, she was a little old for baptism, but maybe she just didn't have it as a kid or whatever. I mean, because she's still kind of young, she's young enough to get babysat, um, but also old enough to you know, um, talk and everything. I can't actually remember how old she is. Now I'm thinking about her. I want to say. Oh, it doesn't matter how old she is. Anyway, that was just funny. I'm just imagining Mikey dressed as a priest for no particular reason. I mean, at this he did have a reason for this, but it was just pretty funny. That I remembered that as I was going to record something else. What did I say we were going to talk about? Oh yeah, how some of these ideas could be used pretty interestingly. Um, I do think that the whole Raphael becomes the new Shredder thing is a honestly severely underrated trope. I think, or not trope, I guess, but it's a severely underrated plot line that these comics introduced. Like I said before, I think it's a really interesting way to explore the consequences of his anger and his more dark tendencies, if he were to at least semi give in to them, because I think even as Shredder, he was a little bit not as evil, or like not evil, but he was like mostly just a bit more ruthless than usual. Um, so I think it's got heavy dramatic weight to it, both in terms of Raphael and the people around him and how they might react to finding out the truth of that. But what else would be fun? Uh, they kind of explored a similar future or like a similar tone in the Same as It Never Was episode of the 2003 series, which I think even had. Oh no, wait, Mikey was the one who didn't have an arm in that one. But yeah, they did have Raphael with only one eye, or he might have been completely blind. Somebody was blind though. Maybe it was Leo, but I do remember. No, Raphael only did have one eye. That's right. So that that's a cool shout out. And I will admit there are some times where they get almost a little bit too dark and too, honestly, a little too real. But, that's just how it goes sometimes. I think Donatello's whole thing with becoming a cyborg could be really fun to explore. Either if it's a permanent option, or if it's like a nightmare he has, or if it's some like, alternate thing, like an alternate timeline in one of the shows, or even something that could happen to him, because the 2012 series kind of made another nod to this in the Mutant Apocalypse arc, which, funnily enough, is also considered non-canon to the series, much like these Image comics. And in the Mutant Apocalypse episode, Donatello is a straight-up robot, but in the comics, he is a cyborg, so he's like biomechanical, basically, or not basically, but like he is biomechanical, and I forgot to mention, he has a gun on his hand, like a big ass, big, like, big gun, like laser gun type shit. And if I remember right, there's one part where he like straight up just like murks these two girls. Like, I mean, they weren't girls. They weren't just like standing there in the middle of the street. They were trying to attack him. They were kunoichi. But yeah, he didn't show no hesitation. He just said "boof, boof." Gave him some of that New York City street justice, as they say. Wow, that was bad. I'm going to stop there with that. And let me know what you guys think of these comics. Do you think that they are fun and interesting, or do you think they are just a very edgy, kind of unnecessary thing, at least when it comes to the overall canon? Or do you think that some of these things could be used interestingly? I think it would be fun to see these concepts more explored in the TV shows. Like maybe one day we can get a nice dark gritty reboot, a la Samurai Jack. But that might not happen. And it might happen though. But most of the time, if these plot lines are brought up, they are referenced kind of piecemeal in AU episodes, or in episodes where you know that it's not going to last, whatever it is. I just do hope that I don't ever have to see Raphael's face melting off in nice, clean, crisp, high def on a TV show. But you know what? If it did happen, I wouldn't be that mad about it either, because Phantom of the Opera and Raphael are two of my favorite things. So it just occurred to me that I totally didn't even talk about the ways that these plot lines, or at least a few of the plot lines, could be used in the current run of the IDW comics. And if you have not read the current run of the IDW comics, or if you're reading them currently or whatever, spoiler alert for some of the things I'm going to be talking about here. But yeah, let's go on and talk about that. So my favorite one, with Raphael becoming the Shredder, I think wouldn't be exactly as shocking as it was back when it was brought into the Image comics, because in the IDW comics, if you don't know, Splinter actually runs the Foot Clan. I'm not sure if he still does, honestly, but I do know that he was given control of it by Karai for a period of time, and it caused a huge rift between him and Michelangelo in particular. The fact that he ran the foot didn't really cause the rift. It was more that Splinter really went off the deep end and became basically a giant tyrant and was doing all this stuff with orphan kids, like not inappropriate stuff that didn't sound right when I said it that way. Basically, Splinter was uh, training these orphans to become foot ninja and like basically like wouldn't let them leave or like wouldn't take care of them if they didn't become ninja, and it just became a huge thing, and Mikey actually tried to like take the kids away and raise them himself, and so that was, you know, a very Mikey thing to do, and him and Splinter actually got into like a physical fight about it, and I think Mikey actually beat the fuck out of Splinter for that one, and Splinter was finally like, wow, I am really becoming an asshole, to put it lightly. And I'm pretty sure after that he gave up control of the Foot Clan because he saw um, how immoral he was becoming. But not the point of what I'm talking about. I do think the only way that Raphael becoming the Shredder would be as shocking as it was back then would be if he kind of resurrected the entire concept of the Shredder, because when Splinter was running the Foot, he did away with that whole part. So if for some reason Raph donned the Shredder's armor and started calling himself that, it probably would still be pretty shocking. Wow, that was a... Yeah, I'm just going to sit here and contradict myself, I guess. But yeah, I'm not really sure exactly how they could work that in, especially with all the stuff that's going on right now. Although I do need to continue reading those because I read that there was some stuff going on with Jenica, and we'll get into Jenica one of these days. But yeah, so I think Leo having his hand taken away. I said taken away like somebody's taken his phone. Like, Leo, give me your sword hand. Your hand privileges have been removed for the day. No, Leo having his hand amputated or eaten off would be interesting, especially with the current things going on, at least current where I'm at, because I'm not completely caught up. Um, that could work across really any version. You know, there's always the question of like, would I still be a good leader with only one hand? He would have to readjust his entire fighting style, and that's a really interesting um, character exploration moment that could be used quite effectively, not just in the IDW comics, but could be used quite effectively in the uh, show, or maybe not the current one, because I don't really see Rise going that far. And yeah, definitely they probably wouldn't do that. But another plot point that I would like to see would be, I really do like the whole thing with Mikey being a writer, and yeah, I'm going to bring this up because it's a lot less heavy than the rest of everything else. So I think Mikey being a writer would be really interesting to see either in the IDW comics or in other versions of the Turtles going forward. However, it is kind of a shame that most versions of the Turtles, at least in the TV shows, make him kind of stupid to the point where it would be surprising if he could even spell the word author. But it is a nice little addition to his character because it really shows that he does have some depth to him. And I really, in particular, like the notion of him being a poet, but I also really like the notion of him being a romance writer because it's something that I think he would be very invested in. He seems to be, at least to me, the one who would be the most concerned with romance, and not in the fact that he's like sitting around like, oh my god, I want to get a partner, and like I'm so like sad that I don't have one. But like I think that Mikey would be the kind of person who is in love with the concept of love itself, kind of in the vein of like the guy from Moulin Rouge. And if you have never seen that movie, you should. It's campy and ridiculous and so good. But I could totally see that kind of thing, and it really works with the whole bohemian kind of thing that they've got going on now in Rise. And I think that making him kind of um, an artiste in general would be fun, especially now that Rise has set that precedent. And there we go. I finally said something positive about Rise of the Ninja Turtles, so you're welcome, Rise fans. Um, However, I do think that the whole thing with him being a poet would be very, very interesting. Um, Not only because you could maybe tie it in and make his pen name Dante, and I know Dante wasn't a Renaissance artist, but he was, an Italian artist who was quite popular. And if you don't know who Dante is, my first thing that I will say to you is go take a English 101 course. And my second thing would be that Dante, or Dante Alighieri, is the author of the Divine Comedy. And if you don't know what that is, I'll say you probably do, but you've probably only heard of the Inferno. But we're not talking about Dante, we're talking about Mikey being a writer, and I think it would just be a fun little nod to other Italian artists if his pen name was Dante, but it could also just be Michelangelo, because how many people do you know that run around with the name Michelangelo? And then it wouldn't really be a pen name, but it would at least come off like a pen name. Um, I can't remember if we ever get to see what his poetry was like in the Image comics. I don't even know if we ever get to see what his um, book was like at all. We only ever hear that it's called a romance, not a romance among the thorns, but that would be a good title too. It's called A Rose Among the Thorns, and it is a romance, and that Oprah loved it. So, and I think I made that point earlier, but so I'm just kind of reiterating myself. So I do think it would be very fun to have him be a writer or something along those lines, because it is a nice dash of character development that we don't really ever get to see with Mikey, especially in the TV shows. The comics don't really have this problem. The comics, he's usually a lot more well rounded. In the TV shows, he tends to be very one note and very mostly just comedic. And I think that's a shame, because he really does have some very hidden, not very hidden, but at least in the show you might think it's hidden potential. He does have some hidden potential and hidden depth to him that I don't think get explored very often, because the people who make the shows are more concerned with having somebody to make all the jokes, and that's usually Mikey, because of his personality. Now, what's another thing that could be explored pretty good? Donnie becoming a cyborg would be fun, especially if it was as angsty as it was in the Image comics. And I do think the whole thing with the computer and his mind fighting is really interesting, because it really does pit him against really his biggest love, which is technology and science. So it is a very almost Frankenstein-esque type tale, where it is the tale of like science gone too far, or like the pursuit of knowledge becoming a toxic relationship. So, and I mean that it's not the most apt comparison, I'll admit, because Frankenstein, or if I wanted to be really, really, really accurate, I could say Frankenstein. Um, and if you get what that was a reference to, I love you, and you get like a million points. Um, but anyway, it's not exactly a Frankenstein situation, because becoming a cyborg wasn't Donnie's choice. It wasn't really something he wanted or was striving to do, but maybe that is a way that you could do it. You could maybe have him become obsessed with enhancing his own abilities, or enhancing the abilities of his brothers, and, introducing these biomechanical uh, weapons or biomechanical concepts to their ninjutsu, and maybe he's using himself as a test subject, which every good scientist knows is, of course, the best way to do it. That was sarcasm, by the way. But, there's no better test group than you. No, please don't. Can, please don't do that. That's not a good. That's actually the worst way to do a test group. But yeah, it could be very interesting to see him kind of descend into that kind of madness. And, that sounds kind of edgy and dark, but, whatever. I think that some of these shows could use a bit of edge and a bit of darkness. Uh, so that's just one way they could do it. And I know I was just talking about the comics. I think it could still work in the comics if they did it the way I was just talking about. Maybe make him kind of obsessed with becoming better and starting to experiment on himself and see what he can make that would make his fighting even better. And, uh, yeah. So that would be very fun. Uh, some other concepts from the Image comics that I think could be fun. The whole thing with Shadow Jones is interesting because it gives another human. But I also would say that I would much prefer in the comics if they introduced Angel. And I don't know if Angel is still in the comics. I think for a while in one of the runs she was around. And if you don't know who I'm talking about, Angel was a character who, at least I remember first from the 2003 series, she was a purple dragon, or she was like a purple dragon initiate. She was trying to get into the gang, and the turtles basically rescue her from becoming part of the gang, and then she kind of becomes like a little fringe part of their group. Um, I feel like there was a point in time anyway, where Angel was brought in for some reason, but I don't know if I'm hallucinating that or if it actually happened. Let me know in the comments. But yeah, those are just a few of the ways that I think some of these plot points could be used in the newest run. Thanks for tuning in. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and I also forgot to mention in the Image comics, Casey is like a straight up alcoholic, and well, is that surprising, really? But yeah, that's just a little side note there. Okay, bye. Roxanne, all she wanna do is party all night.